It begins with silence, not the quiet of sleep or peace, but the kind that drapes the dead. A silence so absolute, it devours memory. Thera 7 floats like a wound in space, quarantined, forgotten. No ships dock here. No signals are answered. The Galactic Council declared it unfit for contact 2 cycles ago, and so it was erased, like a page torn from a book no longer deemed worthy of being read. A lone satellite orbits above, its shell cracked and scorched from micrometeorite fire. Its sensors, once precise and vigilant, now stutter and flicker like dying stars. Below, the research station clings to the moon's brittle surface, half sunken in ash. Wind, if it can be called that in the thin atmosphere, scatters dust like whispers. Inside, the halls are frozen moments of terror. Emergency lights blink through layers of grime. Metal groans under the weight of time. An overturned chair, its leg bent backward. A smear of something, once red, on a wall. 3 claw marks, deep and ragged, like someone tried to hold on as they were pulled into the void. Further down, through sealed doors and decontamination locks overridden long ago, lies the biolab, a place of sterile cruelty. Glass, tanks are shattered, terminals cracked, vats of gene serum now dry, their contents long evaporated into the poisoned air. And then, a sound, barely audible, rhythmic, shallow, breathing. Nestled in the far corner, in the remains of an incubation pod, is something small, curled in on itself, ribs rising and falling like paper. Its skin, mottled and semi-translucent, glows faintly with bioluminescent pulses. Not a monster, not a weapon. Something else. It whimpers. A distress signal pings again, not from the station. Its systems are long dead. The source is internal, biological. The creature is broadcasting through the only medium it has, itself. Its neural lattice pulses with encoded frequency, a cry, pure and raw, cast into the abyss of the void. Elsewhere, far beyond the graveyard of Thera 7, a ship drifts, human, rusted and worn from old wars, the Myriad Sun. A salvage crew scans ancient frequencies. Most are noise, ghosts of battles, past. But this one is different. Not a beacon. Not a call for help in words or warnings. Just a heartbeat, lost in the stars. And humans, flawed, wounded, stubborn, still listen to heartbeats. They change course. The creature had no name. The Rilnari had not believed in such attachments. In the old files, what little remains, there are clinical descriptors. Prototype 8, subject class sentient, emotional anomaly, type 1I4. But buried in corrupted logs and fragmented code, a narrative emerges like light through broken stained glass. The Rilnari were not a cruel race, at least not by their own reckoning. They were scholars of neural complexity, engineers of cognition, builders of minds. But what they could not design, they feared. Emotion, attachment, the ineffable entanglement of love and loss. They created the companion species as a test, a mirror to study what they could not simulate. Engineered from inert DNA strands, the creature was not born, but assembled. Its neural pathways were programmed for curiosity. Its biochemistry was calibrated for bonding. It was a controlled variable, a living model of dependency. But it changed. It learned. It adapted. It began to seek not just data or stimuli, but presence. When a technician left the room, the creature would wail. When spoken to, it responded, not with mimicry, but with tonal empathy. It began to remember names, grieve absences, dream. This deviation was not celebrated. It was dissected. The Rilnari revised its code, introduced inhibitors. But emotion, once born, is not easily unmade. In their effort to suppress it, they ruptured something deeper. A virus, grown from the folds of corrupted empathy, emerged. One that bypassed logic entirely. It fed on connection. It spread along neural interfaces, contaminating everything the creature had once touched. The bioplague tore through the facility, like fire in dry bone. Within a month, the Rilnari declared the station lost. No evacuation, no salvage, no recorder to mourn. The council reviewed the incident and gave it a name. Non-viable species. Emotionally corrupted. Not dangerous. Not unstable. Simply inconvenient. The creature, the last of its kind, was to be forgotten. Its existence marked as failure. Its emotional capacity, once the subject of 1,000,000 experiments, now classified as biological contamination. But buried deep in its memory lattice, beneath layers of trauma and decay, it still carried the lullaby it had once hummed beside the last Rilnari who dared to pet it. It did not forget. It simply waited for someone who might remember what it meant to feel. The stars once birthed life. Now they oversee its sterilization. In the quiet archives of the Galactic Council, beneath the cold glow of data vaults and probability graphs, exists a doctrine not spoken, only enforced. Emotion is entropy. A virus. Beautiful, perhaps, but dangerous. Entire civilizations built on logic and efficiency saw what sentiment could become, and so they carved it out like a rot. They did not mourn what they lost. They documented it, dissected it, and left it in the footnotes of galactic history. The Council's memory is long, longer than rivers, older than war. In the aftermath of countless collapses, the rebellions of the Passionkin, the fall of the Crying Choirs, the Embrace Wars, they decided there would be no more exceptions. Emotion was ruled the source of instability. Entire species were re-engineered. Neural filters were installed at birth. Their worlds became quiet, precise, empty. Thera 7 was never mourned. It was indexed. In recovered transmissions, the last moments of the Rilnari echo like whispers inside a mausoleum. Security feeds show sterile panic. Technicians fleeing their own creations, not with hatred, but with confusion. They didn't understand why their engineered companion wept as they died. They hadn't designed it to. That error, the capacity for grief, was considered a failure of containment, not a tragedy. No council delegation intervened, no aid fleets, no envoys. They watched the final feeds from orbit in perfect formation, their ships still and silent, like stars refusing to blink. When the final signal died, they turned away. Thera 7 was lost. So was the creature, and so was a lesson they were too afraid to learn. In their pursuit of order, the galaxy amputated its heart. Empathy was considered radiation, contagious, blinding, wasteful. No species kept pets. No children carried plush toys. No monuments bore names. They did not understand mourning. They did not understand love, but they understood contamination. The creature on Thera 7, once catalogued as Specimen 93ADL, was reclassified as a Class 3 emotional hazard. Not for what it carried in its cells, but for what it evoked in those who saw it suffer. The logs end there. Not with horror, not with cruelty, but with silence, the kind that only exists in societies that have forgotten how to hold each other. And the creature, still breathing, still waiting, became a relic no one was willing to remember, except the humans. To the Galactic Council, humanity was never a people. They were a variable, too young, too chaotic, their systems of governance inconsistent, their genetic lineage impure, their history violent, myth-ridden, contradictory. Council observers catalogued them like a zoological anomaly. Bipeds, mammalian, emotionally volatile, highly imaginative, dangerously nostalgic. Their arrival into the galactic stage was not heralded with curiosity or kinship, but with caution. Humanity was a species that brought grief into orbit, who cried over satellites, who named ships after gods and ghosts. Their file was stamped with a quiet label, unstable but persistent, and so they were permitted to exist, on the edge, never trusted, barely tolerated, assigned unimportant systems, derelict salvage rights, outer patrol mining stations no one else wanted. The galaxy gave them space, not freedom, just distance. It was in that distance that they found Thera 7. The Myriad Sun was a patchwork vessel, hull scars from asteroid storms, panels stolen from Martian wreckage. Its crew were not warriors, not diplomats, not heroes, just survivors. Captain Lysa Wren, born on the drifting Ark colony of Narcissus 4, which fell silent during the Martian ice collapse. She never spoke of it. Kyle Idrin, former Union medic, discharged after failing to save a school transport during the Black Ring breach. His hands still trembled when idle. Celine Park, pilot, cybernetically augmented after a solar flare fried her retinal nerve clusters. She navigated not with sight, but through sound and pressure waves. She called it the voice of the void. And lastly, Marek. Nobody knew his full name. He came from the cyber vaults, a prison world where identity was burned out and reassigned. He once wrote poetry in the ship logs when he thought no one would notice. They were not a crew. Not really. Just 4 people who had run out of places to run. And the Myriad Sun was their shelter. When the signal came, it was soft, a pulse against the silence, not council code, not Rilnari architecture, something simpler, a rhythmic, wounded frequency, like breathing, like a heartbeat. It shouldn't have existed, not after 2 decades of quarantine. But there it was. Celine was the first to speak. Someone. Something still down there. The others paused. They had no mandate to respond. The salvage from Thera 7 was off limits. The penalties were severe. Council law was clear. Contaminated zones are final. No reclamation. No mercy. But Kale frowned, listening again. "That's not a beacon," he said quietly. "That's a cry." No vote was taken, just a look between them all. And then the ship turned. They entered Thera 7's orbit slowly. The moon loomed beneath them like a scarred tomb. Gray, pitted, choked in atmospheric dust. As they descended, the silence thickened. Not even the winds moved. They found the signal source in the remains of the Rilnari's biological station. Its systems were failing, the corridors cold and brittle. But deep within, past decompression locks and sealed glass doors, they found the chamber. The creature lay curled in a containment pod, half submerged in gel that had long since gone cloudy. It was small, smaller than expected. No fangs, no claws, no visible weapons. Its skin shimmered faintly, adapting to their light. Its breathing was slow, but real. Kyle approached first, kneeling beside the pod. The creature stirred, a thin filament of sound vibrating in the air, too subtle to be language. More like mimicry, echo. That's what they called it then. Echo. Not a pet, not a monster, not even an alien in the traditional sense. Just something alive, something that had survived. For 3 days, the crew debated. The Rilnari files they accessed warned of infection, The logs referenced neural degradation. The council had marked this species as a Class 3 hazard. Merrick, studying the logs, found a phrase repeated in Rilnari annotation. Emotion contagion exceeds tolerances. Not a virus, not a pathogen, but a feeling. Grief, perhaps. Or worse, empathy. Is that what they feared? He murmured. That it would feel too much. Lisa stood at the observation window, watching the stars. She did not turn when she spoke. We can leave. No one would know. But she didn't issue the order, because something in them had already shifted. Echo was not dangerous, at least not in the way the council feared. It was gentle, weak. It attempted to mirror their movements. It pulsed with recognition when Kyle returned to the room. When Selene played a melody through her internal implants, Echo hummed it back, slightly off-key. It wasn't mimicry, it was memory. The crew, each haunted by losses they never dared name, found themselves drawn in. It wasn't that they saw a pet, or even a person. They saw something they couldn't abandon. That was the fracture. That was the beginning. In the entire galactic database, only one species had ever violated quarantine for the sake of a single life form, deemed irrelevant. Only one species was mad enough to listen to a dying sound and answer not with indifference, but with a whisper. We're here. It began with silence, not the sterile silence of vacuum, nor the deliberate quiet of a grieving crew, but the heavy, trembling hush of two species watching one another, and not knowing what would come next. Echo was dying, that much was clear, its skin dulled by cellular decay, bioluminescent pulses now irregular, flickering like a failing star. Whatever infection had wiped Thera 7 still coiled inside it, slowly unraveling its neural pathways. Yet its eyes, if they could be called eyes, still followed them, glowing faintly with that strange, unreadable intelligence, watching, waiting. They tried medicine. Nothing worked. Kyle administered stabilized antivirals, patched its failing circulatory shell, adjusted the pod's filtration fluids. Still the readings declined. Its body rejected most treatments, but it tolerated presence. It responded to voice. Selene was the first to realize it. She would sit by the chamber after her shifts, running her flight algorithms aloud. Habit, not intent. One night, she whispered a memory instead, a half-formed song from her childhood in the Jovian orbitals. An old Earth lullaby, barely remembered, and Echo responded. A soft vibration in the chamber walls, a murmur not from its throat, but its skin. Resonating frequencies mimicking the melody, not precisely, but emotionally. It was not a voice, it was a feeling returned. Kale began reading aloud from old medical texts, not for data, for connection. Echo pulsed during stories of loss. It shrank at descriptions of pain. It brightened faintly when he spoke of a patient who survived. Each day it came closer to the edge of the chamber, resting near the barrier glass as if proximity mattered. Merrick, fascinated, wrote a line in his journal. It does not speak. It remembers. It returns what you give it, not as sound, but as soul. They named the interaction resonance. It became their ritual. At shift's end, one of them would sit by Echo's chamber. They did not speak to it as one speaks to a thing. They spoke as if to a memory, a friend, a ghost of something that should not have survived but did. Slowly, Echo began to mimic their movements. Subtle at first, a tilt of the head, a flick of fingers. Then more deliberate. It began tapping back when Selene tapped on the glass. It mimicked Kale's frown, though imperfectly. When Lysa leaned forward with her hand against the pod, Echo mirrored the gesture, Their skin didn't touch, but something passed between them. Not infection. Recognition. Then one day, it purred. Not the growl of beasts, nor the rumble of machines, but a soft, rhythmic thrum, deep, primal, and warm. The frequency was later analyzed. 72 beats per minute. The average resting human heartbeat. Echo had learned their rhythm. It had synced its sound to their biology. A creature designed for sterile observation, now humming to the pulse of human life. It was Kale who said the impossible aloud. "It's bonding with us." No one disagreed, but the station was breaking. Subsystems began to fail. The power grid, barely held together by improvised relays, flickered without warning. Structural scans showed widening fractures. Gravity plates in several corridors began to falter, creating zones of instability. Thera 7 was dying too, and now they were bound to something that should have been left behind. The Council would never authorize retrieval. Their vessel didn't have the biosecurity shielding to hold the creature in transit. Echo might not even survive extraction. Every moment they stayed, the risk grew. Lisa stood in the command alcove, watching the data cascade in real time, each warning more urgent than the last. "We should go," she whispered. But she didn't move. Instead, she watched Kale in the lab below, cradling Echo in his arms as he replaced a deteriorated gel feed. The medic's hands were shaking again, but not from fear, from guilt. Later, alone in her quarters, Lisa unearthed a data pad locked years ago. On it was a video. Grainy, low resolution, dated from Earth's collapse. It showed a child, her younger brother, chasing a dog through a field of ash and wire. The dog stopped, barked once, and looked back. That was the last image she had of them both. She had fled to orbit. The field had been consumed hours later. That night, Lisa walked into Echo's chamber. She said nothing, just placed her hand against the glass. Echo responded, their pulses aligned. Contact, not through language, not through protocol, but through a need not to be alone. The next morning, she gathered the crew. "We can't save the station," she said, "but we can save it." A silence fell. Celine nodded first, then Marek smiling faintly. "It's already saving us." They began drafting escape plans. They mapped a route from the biochamber to the docking ring. Structural supports would have to be reinforced. Grav stabilizers rerouted. Echo's chamber redesigned for vacuum transport. It was not a rescue. It was a vow to carry something fragile through fire, to refuse to let it die unseen. In that moment, humanity did what the galaxy never understood. They looked at a dying, contaminated, unnecessary creature, and they stayed. There is a moment in every great journey where logic demands retreat. It comes not as a scream, but as a whisper. Calculated, cold, familiar. The numbers do not lie. The odds tilt toward death. The cost outweighs the yield. A single life, especially one not human, is not worth the ship, the crew, the memories they still carry. Thera 7 was crumbling. The infection had breached secondary conduits. Gas ignitions flared through lower decks. The station groaned in its orbit, metal bones warping under pressure long denied release. Soon, its orbit would decay. The reactor's housing had begun to fracture, and Echo. Echo was dying faster now. Kale ran the projections. Stabilization was possible, but unlikely. They could construct a temporary stasis field, build an isolation harness using salvage from Deck G, reroute power from environmental systems to buy time. But that would leave the station colder, darker, and they were already starving. They gathered in the galley. A small room with no light but the emergency strobes. 4 humans, all scarred, all tired, all burdened by ghosts. Captain Lisa leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Kale sat across from her, datapad in one hand, the other trembling over his own wrist, checking unconsciously for a pulse. Marek stared at nothing, a small glass sphere turning slowly between his fingers. A memory token from a dead colony. Solene stood near the door, jaw clenched, eyes wet. "We should leave," Kyle said flatly. No one answered. "We weren't sent to rescue," he continued. "This was a salvage op. We've already gone off mission. The Council won't protect us. There's no reward for staying, only risk." "We're not Council," Solene replied. Kale looked up. "And what are we? Saints? Martyrs?" "People who remember," she said softly. Lisa closed her eyes, and suddenly, she was no longer in the galley. She was 16 again, running through the halls of Habitat Red after a breach in the shielding. The alarms had screamed. The air had gone white with frost. And she had screamed, too. Screamed for her little brother, who had vanished in the chaos. They never found his body. Just his drawing, crumpled, half-burned, of a starship with wings. "We're haunted," she thought, not by death, by what we couldn't save. She opened her eyes. "We stay." Kyle's mouth opened in protest, but she raised a hand. "We stay," she repeated. "Unless you truly believe that leaving this thing to die makes us something better, then the Council." No one did. And so they stayed. They began the impossible. Each crew member contributed what they could. Solene scavenged the remaining Rilnari data cores, desperate for any record of biostabilization protocols. Their alien architecture was nearly indecipherable, but fragments surfaced. Enzyme maps, neuroreactive protein chains, partial vaccine, templates. Echo had been designed in a world that no longer existed, but its creators had left shadows. Kyle worked without sleep, piecing together a cocktail from the remnants. He used human antiviral structures as scaffolds. The rest, he guessed, it was not medicine, it was art, improvisation wrapped in urgency. Echo grew quieter, not weaker, just quieter. Its pulses dimmed to a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat before sleep. But it still reached out. Even in pain, it responded to voices, to memory. Marek rewired the lower deck to reroute power through the biochamber. It would overload within a day. But that was all they needed. Just enough time to cradle a miracle in their arms and run. Lisa began dismantling parts of the ship. She tore out non-essential systems, ripped the navigator cradle from the cockpit, cleared. Space for a stasis capsule. Echo would ride where no maps once lay. They labored in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words felt too fragile for what they were trying to preserve. One night, while Solene adjusted the cryo feed in Echo's chamber, she whispered a story. "I had a dog once," she said, "before the Exodus, a real one. He used to sleep at the foot of my bed. His name was Ion. One day he stopped eating. We couldn't afford meds, not for a dog. My mother told me to be strong." She paused. Echo shifted in its pod. "I held him when he died. And I remember thinking, I would never hold something like that again. It hurt too much." Her voice broke. Echo pulsed, faint, warm. She smiled through tears. "I lied." Elsewhere, Kyle stared into a diagnostic monitor, watching his own pulse sync with Echo's. "This shouldn't be happening," he muttered. "It's just protein and code." But something inside him, something deeper than biology, answered back. Then why does it hurt like this? The night before the escape attempt, they gathered in the airlock. Lisa turned to them, voice hoarse. If anything goes wrong, we split. Priority is the ship. If you can't save Echo, don't die for it. Celine shook her head. You know, we won't leave it. Marek grinned. We're human, remember? Kyle gave a tired laugh. Yeah, damned by sentiment. They turned to Echo's chamber. It lay still, encased in the makeshift stasis pod. Pulses faint but present. Asleep, maybe. Dreaming. Lysa stepped forward and touched the pod. You won't be forgotten, she said. Echo stirred. A sound rippled through the air. Not language, not music. Something in between. A final resonance, one last echo. And then the alarms began. The creature dreamt. And in that dream, it remembered. Not in the way humans do, with images and words and faded recollections. No. Echo remembered in sensations, in warmth and cold, in light through water, in the hush of stillness that came before touch. It was born in a white room with no sky, sterile, silent, observed. Its first sensation was the cold press of glass against skin, the distant hum of machines far above its comprehension. Then, pressure, tiny hands against soft padding, a low tone, repeating. A voice not meant to comfort, but to measure. The Rilnari stood beyond the walls, gazing through sterile partitions. They did not speak to it. They spoke about it. Notes, numbers, chemical, levels, heart rate stability, emotional response latency. It was not a pet to them. It was a lens, a window into something they could not tolerate within themselves. They called it Project L0V3, though the word held no meaning to them. A designation from a forgotten language, hollowed of all sentiment. Echo, though it had no name then, learned quickly, too quickly. It imitated sounds. It mimicked posture. It reached out when one leaned forward. It flinched when a technician raised their voice, even if it wasn't meant for it. And when the room was dark and the Rilnari gone, it would sing. Not in voice, but in frequency. A gentle oscillation that vibrated through the walls like a lullaby no species had ever written. It felt longing. But longing was not in its design, so they changed the parameters. They began the suppression trials, chemicals to blunt emotional synthesis, to fracture neural pathways responsible for attachment. The goal? Control. But something had already awakened, a spark unaccounted for. It remembered, one Rilnari in particular, different from the others, younger perhaps, less efficient. They had no name for Echo, but they hesitated before every injection. They lingered after the sessions ended. Once, when no one was watching, they touched the glass and whispered something. Echo never understood the words, but it felt the warmth. It never saw that technician again. Only needles, restraints, tests that grew harsher, colder, more desperate, until the sickness came. It started in the other chambers. Test subjects, different prototypes, convulsing, bleeding from eyes designed to mimic empathy. Then the researchers. Some wept, others did not. The facility fell silent in stages. The lights dimmed, the hands stopped coming, and Echo was alone. But it remembered, not just the pain, not just the silence. It remembered the warmth of a hand near glass, the tone of a voice not raised in anger, a moment of hesitation that felt like care. That memory became a root, and from it, dreams began to bloom. In its dreams, it stood beneath a tree of light. Not a tree from any world it had seen, but something else. An archetype. Glowing branches, stretched into stars. At its base, pools of memory shimmered like water. It was there Echo saw itself. Not as a specimen, not as data, but as something real, something worthy of being loved. In the waking world, its body withered, cells collapsed, systems failed. But the dream endured when the humans arrived. Echo felt them before it saw them. Their presence in the station resonated like a forgotten song. Their grief, their fear, their chaos, unfiltered, unprocessed, utterly alien, and beautiful. They did not touch it at first. They observed, as the Rilnari once had. But there was something different in their eyes. Less calculation. More ache. The kind that came from remembering what had been lost. One of them, Celine, sat beside the pod and simply spoke. She told stories of stars and storms, of pets and people, of mistakes. Her voice cracked when she spoke of Earth, of a dog named Ion, of a planet swallowed by flame. Echo listened, it responded. Slowly it mimicked her breath, then her hums. Then one day, her laugh. When she cried, it sang back, not in words, but in vibration, in resonance. A frequency that matched the cadence of sorrow, yet curved gently into hope. In its final hours as its body failed, Echo reached out, not with limbs, but with memory. The humans had given it something no scientist ever had. Context. It now knew what it had felt, why it had mourned when the Rilnari vanished, why it had sung in the darkness. It had loved, and it had been left behind but not forgotten. So Echo did something no artificial species had ever done. It transmitted not data, not warnings, not alerts. It sent a dream. Through improvised neural relays and hijacked broadcast nodes, Echo linked its final thoughts to the ship's systems. The signal was raw, nonverbal, chaotic, beautiful. A burst of sensation, image, longing. In the dream, the crew walked beneath that same glowing tree. They stood in the pools of memory. They heard the lullaby, and they understood. It wasn't just a dream, it was a gift, a final memory, offered freely, too. Say, I was here, I felt, and because of you, I was not alone.